casual conversations about science with the scientists themselves. It's the place to be to talk science. This is Coffee and Science with your host, Rob Parks.
Okay, howdy. You know, it helps to actually go live when you start the intro, so people can see it. So howdy, all. As you may or may not know, my name is the Rob, and I am here to interview my best friend, a brother from another mother, Dr. Vic Ricchezza. Now, the two reasons why I want to do this, or as an ongoing series, is to one, just to meet and talk to folks in science or academia, and two, because I feel that there is a growing science denialism movement at least in this country, and I think part of that, or part of the reason for that, is just a mistrust in experts in general. And so I'm hoping that through these conversations, folks will be able to see us scientists as, human beings, and to be able to, we're not part of some nefarious Illuminati plot to hide resources from anyone. So without further ado, Vic.
Hi. If there's resources being hidden in my house, I assure you they're being hidden from me as well.
So I guess my first question for you is Star Wars or Star Trek?
Yes.
All right. Fair enough.
As you well know, I mean, the disclaimer, which you kind of gave to the viewer, is that your charming host and I have essentially been best friends for 30 years. So we were roommates in college, and he knows perfectly well what the answer to that question is.
I think I think I know the answer to most of these questions, actually.
Right. When right around the time that I met said charming host, so back in the to get all geologist on you, I think this would be in the Pliocene epoch. The local channel used to, I think it was channel 44 down in Tampa, used to air syndicated Star Trek, original series stuff. So I used to have the VCR, the VHS DV set to record. This is what us dinosaurs did back in the day before DVRs and streaming TV, is program the VCR to record your hour of Star Trek, complete with commercials and everything. And I had pretty much all those episodes at one point or another on the tapes that eventually I wore until they broke. Likewise, various copies of, the original. I mean, when you say Star Wars, like the first, what they're now calling Episode 4, and that George Lucas has peed on many times, that is not Episode 4. It is not A New Hope. That is Star Wars.
That is Star Wars. Yeah, that's the main Star Wars.
Han didn't shoot first. Han shot only.
Yes. It's a question that really...
Han shot, Greedo died. That's that.
That's it. Yeah. He throws money on the bar. Sorry for the mess.
Exactly.
So
it's the whole reason there's a character arc there, is that he's the sort of person who would kind of ruthlessly shoot someone for thinking about taking them in. And then by the end, he would save the galaxy.
Exactly.
If he starts as a nice guy who's only shooting in self-defense, well, you've made a little bit less progress there.
Yeah, it kind of defeats the whole, character development aspect of storytelling.
Yeah, so. George kind of passed beyond that, I think.
Yeah, actually, the first time we met was I was going in to take an exam. I think it's countywide, maybe. I don't think it was state. I think it was countywide for history or something like that. And I came in late, and all the tables were essentially filled with folks. And I see this particular gentleman sitting at a table wearing a giant Spock t-shirt. I'm like, all right, that's my people. So I said, all right, I'm going to go sitting next
I
to
wore
that.
that. I wore that shirt until it died. Until like Spock had holes in his face.
Nice.
And as I recall, you showed up with some shirt that was like a brain, that was like it had like the parts of the brain labeled, and everything was crossed out, and it was like everything had the word "party" written in on each thing except the one that said "sex."
That's right. I remember that shirt. I have no idea.
And it was the same thing. I'm like, I don't know who this guy is, but he's all right. He can sit down.
I can't remember when I lost that shirt. Probably somewhere in college. Speaking of which, tell us about your educational experience. Like when you
Oh
where did you
God,
go to undergraduate?
it's a good thing we have plenty of time here, because that is an adventure, and I'm you on your channel here, I know you've been very open about some of your mental health realities. And for me, although as a bit of a side note, that's something I've kind of come to later in life, which we can talk about separately if you want to later. For me, it's this, that what I talk about kind of with students, especially, is this very, very meandering educational journey that that you were there for a lot of. That I think students get presented an idea, especially when they're in like middle school and high school, that if you want to be successful, your permanent record from second grade is going to, determine what happens to you in life. And it's such crap. I mean, so few people that I know in academia and in science actually got, in this straight line path of, I'm going straight through school. I knew exactly what my major was. I'm going straight undergrad, grad school, and then straight to faculty or science jobs. And so many people have this meandering path. So in my case, I attended the University of Florida with your charming host.
Go Gators.
Indeed.
F Georgia.
Yes, we were quite amused at their loss yesterday. For whatever it ends up being worth, it was for 3 hours. It was delightful. Then let's see. So I came in kind of unsure what I wanted to do with myself. I had been one of those students in high school who took to everything pretty well without a whole lot of effort. And I took all the wrong lessons from that. What I took from that essentially is that I am the smartest human being in the room. And I'm not, at this age, I have come to realize that I'm not necessarily always the dumbest human being in the room, but I think I might have been either making a lot of gross assumptions about the room, or I might have been mischaracterizing the likelihood that the room represented a representative sample of the world. So I got to college unsure of what I really wanted to major in. I had no study skills of any kind. I had done very well in math and science, especially, throughout high school. So, but I wasn't really sure what I wanted to do with it. My friend in question had always been for as long as I remember, I knew you wanted to be an astronomer. Mm-hmm. So I started as an astronomy major, and we were sitting at an hour about like this, pretty, I don't know, more like 9:30, I guess. But when Calculus 3 starts, Calc 3 derivations in astrophysics start at 9:30 in the morning, and you're hungover and trying to write this stuff down through one bloodshot eye. I could follow it, I guess, but it's just like, oh, this is brutal. And we had a great instructor, but it was pretty brutal.
Yeah,
anyway,
I remember you showing up to class with coffee and cigarette in hands.
Yeah. Yeah, don't smoke. It's bad for you, but it's a long since a quit thing. Yeah. Coffee, on the other hand,
is necessary for life.
It's a whole nature of the show, I guess. Mm-hmm. Anyway, So over the course of my time there, I don't think how to even construct this narrative since we have a little bit more long form time here. I came in having taken a lot of AP classes, some of which were with your host here. So I came in 1 credit short of actually starting college as a sophomore. So essentially, I needed 3 years of college credit to graduate. It still took me 5 years to get those 3 years of credit. This was basically for the reason that I got into the room, as it were, and it was a bit of a shock to discover that not only was I not the smartest person in the room, but I wasn't even in the top half. That there were people there who were easily smarter than me and who worked a lot harder than I did on top of it. And that the grades in the classes were largely based on them. And while this was going on, I was also discovering the joys of drugs and alcohol, and the mentally soothing effects that they can at least temporarily have. So I discovered after a while that I was somewhere around, I think, modern physics.
Yeah.
That I had to drop the class and I was going to have to retake the class and then take the whole sequence of classical mechanics and electrodynamics and all this other stuff. And that was just to graduate with an astronomy degree. And what the Rob here could tell you is that a bachelor's degree in astronomy is there's very few things, at least back then, and probably still to this day, that you can directly go out and do with a bachelor's degree in astronomy.
Would you like fries with that?
Well, I mean, you can convert to become probably a high school teacher, which is I've done it. It's a fine occupation. If that's what you want to do, that's great. There's a lot of jobs out there in the world for which you need a college education. And it certainly isn't a fries with that type thing. Like, for example, as a side note, my sister, who's several years younger than me and went elsewhere, came in, did very well as a student, got a BA in anthropology, and has gone into a wide variety of office jobs where she does a lot of Excel work and never really had a particular passion for anthropology. Somebody there wanted her to go to grad school, and she was like, "That's a lot of papers, and I don't want to do. I want to make money." And but never really had the passion for it. Anyway, I distinctly remember a situation, and I think you walked in on it, where I'm kind of laying back on the couch in our apartment, with at the time, the University of Florida was like the second most majors you could take on any one single college campus behind, like, I don't know, Michigan or Ohio State or something. And this is, the internet existed in its sort of proto stage, but most of this stuff was really still done in the printed paper catalog.
Yeah.
So I've got the course catalog laid out in my lap. I have a joint in one hand and a beer in the other hand, and I'm flipping through I got to change majors. What am I going to take? I'm already like a year and a half in or 2 years in or something. So I already have, essentially, by the time the major change goes in on paper, I'm going to be a senior and have no progress in that sense. But I've got prerequisites taken. What am I going to do with this? So I landed through 2 things, which was entomology, roaches,
Mm-hmm.
and geology. I said, well, offhand, I'm going to say the rocks probably are the winner over the bugs. But I don't want to make a catalog decision. Let's take the first class in the geology sequence, which oddly enough is the one I teach these days. So to give it away, I ended up as a geologist. And then I ended up doing that. And one of the things that tipped it in that favor is it's certainly true then, and still mostly true, that you could get a bachelor's in geology and you could go to work. You could get a pretty lucrative job doing all sorts of different types of work. So that was something that I did. I wasn't a good student. I wasn't a good geology student. I was that student who showed up just enough to get right across the finish line. And the professors knew I could have done more, but they knew I didn't do so little that they could, kick me out.
Yeah.
So I graduated, as I said, I came in with a year's worth of credit. I took 5 more years to do it. I got a Bachelor of Arts. So at the time UF offered, and they may still do this, most people who get a geology degree to get a Bachelor of Science did.
We'll come back to that, Teddy.
Well, there's some good questions there. Sorry. As I was saying, UF offered a Bachelor of Science. They also offered a Bachelor of Arts, and that track is primarily intended for people who are going to do like environmental law or things like that, where they're not really going to practice geology, and it has slightly less. You don't have to take as much chemistry, things like that, but the requirements are just a hair easier. So you know which one I picked. So I got a Bachelor of Arts in a science. I took 5 years to get 3 years of college credit, and I graduated with a 2.15 GPA. And I think the highest grade I ever got in any of the majors classes was a C+. So that gives you a little bit of an idea about my undergraduate experience. After I graduated, I went home for a year and was a substitute high school teacher. That was a miserable experience in every possible facet. Living with my parents again was not my idea of a good time. And being a sub was not fun either, because it's being a sub, I didn't mind being in the school, but it isn't really what you want to be if you want to be there. There's no stability. There's no good pay and any of that stuff. Anyway, one of the things I, looking back, really felt like was a huge failure of the geology program at UF is they did a really bad job of telling us what you could do with the degree. There was this feeling that you could get a job, but they didn't tell you exactly where.
Yeah.
So as it so happened, one of the biggest drivers of employment for geologists, especially in Florida, is the environmental industry. That is, there are rules from the EPA on down to your local county environmental department about exactly how many parts per million of benzene can be in the soil and groundwater, down to how gasoline has to be stored in storage tanks, to what asbestos can be in the ceiling tiles, how lead paint has to be dealt with, and so forth. And these all vary. Anyway, that in Florida, they get 90+% of their drinking water out of the ground. Geologists are generally the ones that tell them where and how to get the water out. So when there are also, at the time, there were like 20,000 leaking gas stations with their storage tanks in the ground. Hopefully everybody can kind of put one and one together and get 3 here, which is really bad tasting groundwater. There was plenty of work there to be had. So I went into environmental consulting. I worked about 4 years, I guess, back in Gainesville, where we had gone to college. I visited a friend, a mutual friend of ours up in New York City, and really enjoyed New York, and went, me and a friend of mine that I was living with at the time, Elmo, we said, you know what, this is awesome. Let's just go for it. So we cashed out our 401ks and quit our jobs, packed everything up in our cars, and just drove up there. Stayed with a friend for a while and moved to New York. And I eventually found a consulting job up there, worked there for about 5 years, met my wife, got married. Some guy here was next to me when that happened. Yeah, some dude. Just found some random guy on the street.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you found Captain America and
yes,
Spider-Man.
As a matter of fact, if you find somewhere on my Twitter account, you can find it as well. We what he's referencing is, well, we got married in Central Park, which you can do for $25. You just pay the city. The rate may have gone up in the last 12, 13 years, 13 and a half years. But there are rules, no amplification, and you have no particular claim to any spot. You can't set stuff up. You just stand there and have a wedding. But when we were there, we're setting all this stuff up, and these two guys walk through. And this is, mind you, this is before the whole like Marvel movie craze. And these two dudes show up dressed in full body costumes as Spider-Man and Captain America. And I guess in talking to them later, they had gotten involved in some kind of a bet, and they lost, obviously. The terms of the bet were that they had to walk through Central Park on Saturday afternoon or morning or whatever, and they had to pose, no questions asked, for pictures with anyone that asked, which is how they ended up in our wedding album. With my wife, I think, dreamily looking at Spider-Man. It was pretty funny. Anyway, so I worked there for about 5 years, and that was good work. It was certainly, even to this day, the most financially lucrative job I've ever had. However, there are certain disadvantages of having some sort of a job in environmental work where you go and do things and get contaminants on your clothes and come home from that every day. And I never really would go so far as to say that I loved the work. It was work. I was treated fairly. And I don't want to present the appearance that any of the companies I work for was an unreasonable arrangement or anything. It was just to weave 6 different narratives in at the same time. This will come up again when I talk grad school. There's something I learned later, is that there are different kinds of motivations. There's intrinsic motivations, and then there's extrinsic motivations. And intrinsic motivations are things that you want to do for their own sake, that drive you personally from inside. Extrinsic motivations are external factors. Like, I want to go to job because if I don't go to job, I will not have job.
I will not get paid.
Right, exactly.
Money good. Yeah.
Right. Internal job is, I love job. I want to know answer to question. I go to job. That kind of thing. Like, do you go to tap dancing class because you love to tap dance? Intrinsic motivation. Do you go to tap dancing class because mommy will be disappointed if you don't? Extrinsic motivation. And the more you depend on extrinsic motivation, the harder it is to get your ass out of bed when you're having a mental health problem. Whereas if it's an internal thing, you legitimately love it. And it's nothing is a cure-all, but the more something is something you legitimately love, the less you have to push yourself over a hill to do it. And where I'm bringing that in here is, there was nothing about testing a gas station to see whether they were having a spill that I intrinsically give a shit about. I mean, in a vague, good human being sense, I hope they're all not leaking on my behalf, on everyone's behalf. But I don't drive by an Exxon station and say, gee, I wonder if it's leaking this way or that way, or who cares? Like, that's their problem. That's the neighbor's problem. So my wife and I were talking about having kids, and I don't know if you've ever gone through Manhattan and seen children being pushed around Manhattan in a stroller. They're 9 months old and look jaded. And then when they get old, and with apologies to anybody here who's watching who grew up in Manhattan, I'm probably going to insult you further, and it's not personal, because believe me, I've got even more feelings for anybody who grew up anywhere. I'm an insulting misanthrope. But what I noticed with the kids there is that, like, you know, it doesn't matter what they see, hear, or smell. By the time they're 3 years old, they've seen it all and they don't care. But when they're 16, the idea of getting a driver's license is horrifying, and none of them want anything to do with it. Because why would you? That's how you get run over. Like, there's the subway right over there, which really is part of the reason that I moved there, was so that I wouldn't have to drive for a while. But also, you know, this idea of bringing home contaminants to a house with small children, which, you know, plenty of people have to do that. But I was looking into the idea of doing something else with my life. And one of the things that interested me was maybe becoming a teacher. I had the experience to the education system as a sub. So I said, well, why not do this? Unfortunately, for my situation at the time, the state of New York required, probably still does, a master's degree to teach high school. And they required not just a master's, but I think also, you know, direct teaching certification stuff. There was not a lot of alternative ways in. So we talked about it and decided to move to Georgia, where I live. I live now, but that was a different trip to Georgia.
Yeah.
So that was about 2009.
Yep.
And I was a high school teacher in Fulton County for 4 years, which was a very interesting experience. I liked it in a lot of ways. I found that there's a lot to it, and I like it. There are only two aspects of it that I did not really like. One was that when you teach high school, in most cases, you're going to end up with students in your room who don't want to be there in any way at all. And I don't just mean that they don't want to take that class, because I still have that problem. I mean that they don't want to be in school. They're 17 years old and they're over this BS idea of high school. But there are legal things in place where they lose their driver's license if they haven't finished and gotten a GED or something, you know, whatever. So it's just easier for them to stay in school. And hey, stay in school, kids. But I also understand from the point of view that if this is not the direction you really want your life to go, you're just over it in the moment. And that doesn't make reaching them in the classroom a particularly easy sell. Likewise, when somebody's not doing well in class, I don't really want to call their mom. If you're in my class, I want to have an interaction with you. I don't want to call your parents because I don't know them and I don't want to know them. And I suppose when you're dealing with middle schoolers or something, it's, you know, there is this feeling more like you're dealing with children. Mm-hmm. You know, I have a middle schooler now, and I would not expect anyone to totally just deal with that kid. They would have to bring it to me, because that kid can be very smart, but also forgot to tell us that they had gotten the student their school pictures. Gives you an idea with here.
Nice.
Yeah, we got an email. This is the last day to buy the school pictures. What school pictures? Oh, those school pictures. Okay. Anyway, so what I figured out after all that was that I like geology. I like what I did. I just didn't necessarily want to investigate these environmental sites. I like education. We didn't want to live in Georgia thinking about moving, going somewhere else. I needed to potentially broaden my teaching license that I had gotten a normal teaching license by then in Georgia. I had gotten certified to teach at the virtual school. I had been contacted and wrote their online geology class for the Georgia Virtual School by then. And we were thinking about like, well, I probably need to go to grad school. And it was the sequence of rapid, like, well, if this, then this, then this, then this. Well, if I'm going to teach somewhere else, I probably need to go to grad school. And the immediate thought was, well, I guess I need an education master's. Wait a minute. No, I don't. I already have a teaching degree. I could get a master's degree in anything. I could just go get a master's in geology. Yes. Then there was this thought like, well, if I get a master's in geology, I don't have to teach high school anymore. I could teach a 2-year college. Well, if I'm going to teach college, why not just get a PhD? There are lots of reasons not to get a PhD. And we would be happy at length to have a 2-hour conversation with you about why not to get a PhD. That's a whole other story. Especially because what I actually do is I teach at a 2-year college. So I could have stopped after that master's, but that's a whole other story. So I found while teaching online as an adjunct for the Georgia Virtual School, I found a graduate program at the University of South Florida doing geoscience education research. The shortest way to explain that is essentially geology experts studying how to educate geologists. It's not education through the education college. Anyway, so I spent 5 years there. I got a master's and a PhD through USF. Graduated in 2019. I taught as an adjunct for them for a year. And then I got a job offer from Perimeter College at Georgia State University. So for those not familiar with the area or its rich educational history, there is a 2-year college here that started, I believe, as DeKalb College in DeKalb County, Georgia. Mm-hmm. Had multiple different campuses. That later changed its name to Perimeter College, which is a state 2-year college. Perimeter College, I wasn't here, but it's my understanding there were some problems related to financial bottom lines and graduation rates.
Yes.
Likewise, Georgia State University downtown was having their own issues regarding overall enrollment and some of their demographic concerns. And the state decided to solve these problems by smashing them together.
Yep.
So Perimeter College became like a semi-autonomous college within the university, which happened a few years before I came here. And so my email address and all that stuff is all GSU. There's a GSU sign on the wall, but like I'm on a listserv for the geology department downtown, but I've only met like 2 people there. We're not really part of that. I'm not part of their downtown geology department. I'm part of the Department of Life and Earth Science for Perimeter College. Because it's a different job. I'm educating for intro students and they're educating for majors. Part of my job is to meet general ed requirements, 98% of it. And then those other 2% is, I've managed to get you interested enough to care. Well, the people downtown would love to meet you. Go. So I think I've spent about 25 or 30 minutes talking about the answer to your question, which was, tell me about your education. So it went this way, and then it went this way, and then it went that way. And when you go back to grad school at 38 years old with a family and a need to get through, but there's much more compared to how I was at 18, a sense that you know who you are and what you want and why you're there. When I went in the first time, I knew that I was 18 and I did not want to live in my parents' house, that I liked, booze and weed and whatever. And that apparently you have to go to class some of the time or they make you leave. But I didn't necessarily, very occasionally. And that they didn't, for the record, he pretty much went to class. Certainly compared to me, he was like a model student. But this is how you end up with a 2.15 GPA, is that not really understanding who you are. Kind of, you're on a bit of a self-discovery journey and figuring out what you want to do. Like, I graduated, still didn't know what I wanted to do. By the time I start grad school, I know who I am, I know what I want to do, and I know why I'm there.
Yeah.
So there was much more of a boom, 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 boom. And it was kind of interesting. At first, there was a degree of imposter syndrome that I think everybody feels in grad school.
Mm-hmm.
And in fact, I think if you ever go to grad school and meet someone who claims they never felt it, they're either lying or they're not trustworthy because they're weird. But and I also should say, with regards to something like imposter syndrome, there's a difference between imposter syndrome, which is somebody who has these internal feelings that they are a bit of a fraud, versus somebody who has minoritized identities, who legitimately is being kind of more overtly told by those around them that they don't belong.
Yeah.
Those are not really the same thing. And I'm not trying to put myself in that state that about me or any other, very majoritarian identity type person like myself. What I'm referring to, for those who are not familiar with the term, is essentially you get in these classes, you get really excited, you got to grad school, you get in the class, you sit down for about 2 weeks, and they start talking about terms you don't know. Or they start talking about research techniques or citation techniques or whatever, and they're using terminology you don't know, or you're not like the people around you in some way. In my case, it was that I'm 15 years older than they are. And there's this sense, when taken to the extreme, that like you're going to be in the middle of class in October, and like the graduate dean's going to walk into class, look around and go, "Oh, you get the hell out of here.
Yeah.
What are you doing here?" Like, and they're never going to do
not
something.
belong.
They're not going to do that. But like it's somehow like your advisor, whoever they are, they're probably pretty smart. That they just had this one momentary brain fart in evaluating you. And any day now, they're going to realize, what did I do letting this imbecile in? And, same deal. You got to go. And of course, it never happens, but the feeling doesn't really go away much either. You just kind of learn to deal with it. Anyway.
Yeah, it's kind of like a sword of Damocles hanging over your head. You're like, eventually it's going to fall on you, and you just have to prepare yourself for when. But in reality, it's something of your own making.
Well, it's also the part of what helped me with it is realizing and talking to all the other grad students that pretty much the rest of them all felt the same way too. They weren't all 15 years older than when they'd graduated, but they all had some reason why they felt out of place, why they didn't know the people or know the material, or felt like they were also about to be booted out the door. And I think I met one or two people who claimed they never felt like that, and they were all jackasses. Like, so,
Clive, we're looking at you.
So that was something that when talking to students and prospective students now, or going into grad school, that's one of the things I try to tell them is like, hey, by the way, when you get over the elation of being there and you settle in, if this happens, it's normal, totally normal. And just about everybody around you is feeling the same way. What was somebody I said, yeah, but those people are faking it better than me. Anyway, I think that one might have been one of the longest interview answers I have ever given. So,
all right. Well, actually, that kind of ties in to, I guess my next question is, this is primarily or I've heard this primarily from female colleagues, but there's this idea that
okay, I have to make fun of you for using that word, because I must, anytime anyone says females about humans, I must I have to use the Quark voice. females.
Yes.
Go on.
I would imagine that there's the what I've been told is some of my colleagues have felt in grad school that what they're essentially they're being forced to make a choice, career or family. And so I know with your story, you sort of had the family first and then got the career, but you were still going through grad school with small children. So,
So that's a very, very good question. I can also say that what my answer to it is almost certainly going to be different than what any of the females in question would answer. Where I've seen the most complaints from women, or try to be more, I guess, trans inclusive, but people who may give birth, that they get hired, and then there's, for those of you who do not work in academia, if you get hired in a tenure track job, there's a span of time. You get hired as basically an assistant professor, and you get, what is it, 5 to 7 years essentially is the approximate timeline when they expect you to do X number of things. And then they evaluate you. You submit a tenure packet. You go up for review, and they decide if you have checked the necessary boxes to receive tenure and become an associate professor. This is somewhat of a simplification, but it gives the basic idea. There is what they call a tenure clock. So that's the whole, like, roughly 5 to 7 years. One of the things that I noticed with people that stop to give birth is that they somehow have that gap in time held against them. Well, you didn't publish any papers from this year. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I made a human being. Like, well, your colleague across the hall, had kids. No, his wife had kids. And he left her hanging out to dry and came in and worked 12-hour days. Like, and this is, in some cases, especially more of the high activity research universities, the incentive structure and the way that everything is built around a very old model of men working, a single income families, where they would work however many hours were necessary in order to get the job done. And there was a spouse at home, if they were married, who took care of all the other domestic stuff, including child rearing. And as they changed their model a little bit, being pulled the whole way into be more inclusive, to make jobs for women and so forth, they resist any change whatsoever in how the model runs. Like, well, it's not fair to your colleagues if we give you more time, kind of thing. It's just like, maybe your whole model of how the clock works is stupid and should be completely rethought. That's the kind of thing that I think of when I think. I mean, obviously, there's more to women in academia than just having children.
Yeah.
There's significant more issues regarding harassment, regarding, when I entered my name here, it asked me, what do I want to be known as? Mm-hmm. I thought, should I put pronouns in, which I do. I do generally put those in. Did I want to put a title in? Most of the women colleagues that I know, when they have like a Twitter account or whatever, they have to put doctor in front of it or PhD at the end of it, because if they don't walk into a room and put that title out there, students talk to them like they're undergrads and give them absolutely no respect. But if they do use the title, they're treated as though they're essentially snotty. Like, oh, doctor, like, and I don't
even
face
I've gotten that kind of
right, but it seems to be far less for us.
Yeah.
And I don't know. I think I'm kind of rambling an answer on that one, but
Well, it kind of also follows into something I wanted to ask you. What are the largest challenges do you see in the next, say, 5 years with academia? But um, one of the when I interviewed myself, because I love to do that for the last show, I think I talked about the fact that academia seems there are certain academics who seem to believe that we should run on a meritocracy, which is great in theory.
Yeah, but
People,
what is that?
yeah, and actually that's it's
Because
problematic for a couple of things.
these are usually the people that complain when there are more non-white men hired, because the people who believe in the meritocracy idea, not universally, obviously,
Yeah,
like I believe in the idea that the best person should get a job, but if they hire more women and they hire more black people and they hire more Asians and whatever, many of those same people will come up with this idea that, well, you're weakening your standards, and they don't see that there is an inherent racist and sexist assumption that the people you're letting in are not up to snuff.
yeah.
And what's actually been happening for many, many years is all of those people have been fully qualified all this time, and they haven't been given the time of day because they don't look like us.
Yeah, exactly.
There's an answer to the overall question, like what needs to happen, what are the challenges in academia. It comes back to internal and external. Like internal challenges is that there are serious social change, diversity, equity, inclusion type things that are going on that the university administrations seem to really want to hold a lot of committee meetings about, that by and large seem to be ways to issue statements and not change anything.
Yeah.
To make more work for people who aren't straight white men, because who ends up by and large serving double time in all these committees, people that aren't straight white men. But the administrators are often straight white men, and they end up making all of the decisions, and they don't want to upset the apple carts and the donors and the politicians. The extrinsic change factors are, if we're talking about state schools, the funding often comes from state governments, from state legislatures, from changes from the federal government and how loans and Pell Grants and things like that work. And these are often completely at odds with what these internal pressures are coming to. So, depending on what political party is on the rise in your state or in the nation, is there more or less funding for the school? And that makes a big difference in terms of what the school is going to be able to do, in terms of how much the credit hours cost. Well, if you do something where credit hours are more highly subsidized or cheaper, free or whatever, obviously it's going to open more opportunities for people to go to college. But some people don't want that to happen. They don't want people to go to college.
Yeah, actually, do you think that college should be free? Like, do you think, well, more broadly, do you think all education should be free?
I mean, now we're just to be clear that now we're definitely ranging into personal opinion.
Yeah.
I think that public education should be free. Yes. I don't necessarily. Yeah, sure.
Okay.
I don't necessarily know about graduate school, although, as you know, I don't know about most, but a lot of people that go on and get doctorates they don't necessarily pay for that. I mean, you pay for it, but you pay for it up here, but like
more of an emotional bill than anything else.
They pay you a very, very crappy salary, and then they write off there's a certain scam aspect to that too, where you have to take research. For a master's, there's more like classes that you have to take, and then a little bit of thesis research at the end. By the time you take a doctorate, as you personally very well know, there's maybe a very small handful of classes that you might have to take. And the majority of the time is you're doing research.
Yeah.
Because it's a research degree. Well, they're not just going to say, hey, you're here for a doctorate, do your research and get back to us when you're done. Oh, no, no, no. The books have to show that you're taking, as a student, that you're taking classes.
Yeah.
So they sign you up for these classes. There's no class. It's just you doing research. Like, you're not turning anything in. You're not working for you. Like, you're only working for your dissertation advisor. Like, when you actually do the research, that's a whole separate thing where you turn in the dissertation and get grilled by a committee who makes you feel like a piece of crap. Like, that's a whole nother issue. They build this class or series of classes for year after year that they then charge tuition and fees and all that from. Then they, out of the magnanimity of their heart, waive the tuition, which they just made up anyway. But then in most places, you end up paying the fees on it anyway. So there's $750, $1,000 a semester or something, whatever it depends on. And if you're in state or out of state. And the whole thing is just a ridiculous scam. It's like textbooks. Like,
yeah,
we started on those.
With at Georgia State, it was sort of exacerbated. I don't know how
Georgia State pays my mortgage, and they are flawless and perfect.
They are fantastic.
Yeah, everything about them is great. And I would like a raise.
I don't know how it worked at USF, but with Georgia State, because of basically political funding issues, we had to be signed up for 25 credit hours every year, regardless of what we were actually doing. Meaning we had to be a full load, take on the fees for a full load. Yes, they paid our tuition, but we still had to pay.
You had to pay the fees.
Documents.
It's very interesting. We had to be considered full time, but full time for a graduate student was 9 credit hours.
Yeah, for us it was like a ridiculous 25 or something of that nature. It was one of these where somehow credit hours, student taking the number of credit hours taken by students equals money, because that means engagement with the department. And so,
oh yeah, absolutely. Well, it's part of the reason. Sorry, I'm looking to see if my wife has any tissues on her desk. I desperately need to blow my nose. One of the things that was the big issue with our department was they got credit for degrees granted.
Mm.
So I got actually admitted as a PhD student straight from bachelor's. And they never pressured me one way or the other, but my advisor told me he thought it would be a good idea for me to get a master's for a variety of reasons. And in his mind, because I have nothing bad to say about that dude. He was amazing. I think in his mind, it had more to do with like, this is sort of like the minor leagues version of doing a dissertation. Like, it's learning how to do research and present it in public and deal with a committee, but in a smaller, more manageable way. Anyway, the school was all for it because then they got to issue another degree.
Mm-hmm.
And it was more bang for their buck, but they did nothing else. They didn't have to admit any more students, kind of thing. There's so much of it that's just, I don't want to say that it's a scam in the sense that there's like a pyramid scheme or something like that. There's some person there who's concocted some ridiculous scheme. It's more like this broad overall system that's sort of over time been amalgamated, and it's forced people's hands that in order to get a certain way, they have to do things a certain, like, if you have insurance and you go to the doctor, okay, so this has nothing to do with universities. On paper, they'll say, that's an office visit. That's $300. There's no way on earth that they're ever going to get $300. But then they know that the insurance company is going to like write off $180 right off the top. They're going to give them $40, and then you're going to give them whatever the copay is. But if they turn around and actually charge you what it costs, the insurance company would want to write off 3/4 of that money. So they just artificial inflation on the money.
Mhm.
If you follow what I'm getting at, leads to this like system thing. And I get the feeling that a lot of this academia stuff is kind of like that. Like you got politicians who either foolishly don't understand how education works and are trying to meddle with it, or worse, cynically totally do understand how education works and are trying to mess with it on purpose.
Mhm.
And neither helps. I don't want to make your show into a CNN talking heads thing about political parties, but the reality in the United States right now is that people with a college degree overwhelmingly do not vote for the Republican Party. And if you look at what the Republican Party does at state and national levels, they cut funding and impose restrictions on colleges.
Yeah.
And I have a hard time believing that the people doing it are unaware of the link. I think, and then you end up with people thinking that colleges and universities are indoctrinating people.
Yeah.
And I suppose there are some classes where there's types of learning that you might even consider to be indoctrination going on. I don't know. I never took a political science class or something like that. I could tell you that, in classes where you learn how to dig petroleum out of the ground, you're certainly not indoctrinating you with liberal principles.
Well, you did take, what was it, Marriage and Family or Men Suck 101?
I did take I had a general education class. What's interesting about that one, it was called Marriage and Family, and I took it because I'm like, this sounds amusing and easy.
Yep.
And it was not amusing. I don't want to say it was particularly hard.
Yeah.
And I, like all the other classes that I thought sucked at the time, I have to look at it now through the lens of my effort. So I don't know the degree to which the class was the problem, but the class wasn't the solution. What I found with classes that were similar to sociology, because that was through the sociology department,
Mhm.
is that when you get really intro survey level on a sociology class, you didn't get a lot of methodology. What you got is a lot of results.
Yeah.
So instead of talking about like, hey, we wanted to know this thing, so here is how we sampled surveys and interviews and things like that, and here's who we talked to, and here's mathematically why it's representative of that, because these are things that actually were a significant part of my graduate education, and the research work that I've done is some of very high overlap with social science methods. They didn't get into that. They were just like, well, this percentage of families involve deadbeat dads, and this percentage of families involves divorce, and this percentage. And it was like, it doesn't seem like I'm learning about how they studied this. It's just a series of statistics all about.
Sorry, alarm's going off.
Yeah, it's for you.
This happened the last time too. Anyway, go ahead.
This, as you would say, like a whole sequence of stats that are all about like men suck, which looking back on it now that I'm 45 years old, through the long-term and recent term history of our country and our world, they're not wrong, but it wasn't particularly eye-opening in the moment. I didn't really learn anything then about social trends, nor did I learn anything about social science methods. So in that respect, I wish I'd have taken something else.
I do think that if there is a case to be made for indoctrination, I think it is. I think you're onto something in that you have these classes that essentially tell you this is fact. This is what it is in stone, but they don't really explain how you get to that point or how they got to their results, and to what degree of uncertainty there is in how much men suck.
Well, you could pick something like men suck, but I also could understand now, having taught a number of introductory courses, and you've taught them yourself, that some of it comes, and it was so long ago that I don't even remember it that well, but I wonder the degree to which there is a lot behind that, and they just didn't have the time to delve into the methods. Like the stereotypical class in my field, as everybody knows, is rocks for jocks. Where you give this survey level class on geology, and in its most stereotypical form, it's a slideshow about, here's this rock, here's that rock. Do you know the work cycle? Like, right. And it's like, when it's taught in that way, you don't really learn anything about the earth or how it works. You just learn the name of some pictures and a couple of rocks and, okay, plate tectonics, and then you're done. Like, the one for you, I believe it was Stars for the Stupid. And astronomy is nothing really more than applied physics, done in a way that it's very, very difficult to actually reproduce the experiment.
That is difficult to get certain people to understand. That's true.
One of the things that was very, if I can completely go sideways with this,
sure.
The background I had in astronomy ended up being super frickin' helpful going into geology, because there are a couple things that astronomy and geology have very much in common. One is an understanding of deep time. If you study chemistry, you are for the most part studying the speed of reaction in at most a matter of hours. Anything that doesn't happen within a matter of hours to days, they usually don't talk about in chemistry classes. If you're talking about biology, again, it's usually within things that can be noticed within the human lifespan.
Yeah.
Evolution overlaps a little with geology, and it takes place over longer than a human lifespan to really notice significant changes in most cases. And that's part of where you get a lot of pushback from people, because it's wider than the time span that they can really wrap their heads around. But in geology, and even more so in astronomy, you're talking about a number of years that can be expressed as a number times 10 to the X power, and that power is pretty big.
Yeah.
Where the Earth, you're talking about the age of the Earth being 4.56 billion years old. And in astronomy, you're talking about that's what, maybe a third of the age of the universe, that. But where you're still talking order of magnitude, you've got the basic idea that if you put things on a linear scale and roll out like a piece of tape and mark the events of history from whatever you want to call the current understanding of the Big Bang to now, like, human history isn't even, like, you draw a line with a pen, it's too wide.
Yeah. We are a fraction of a second.
Right. Even if you do from the Earth to wherever, like, if they do it as one of the ones we do in our classes, we talk about it as if the Earth was created on that's a very poor choice of words. The Earth is formed at January 1st at midnight, then, like, people come around at, like, December 31st at, like, 11:59 or 11:58 or something like that, like 2 seconds before present. So it's, as a matter of fact, like, when we split up geologic time, if you split geologic time into 9 pieces, the Precambrian is the first 8. And it's the part that is mostly just, if you look at a geologic time scale, they blow up everything after that. And if you actually look at the numbers, you're like, this is not to scale. This is not. But it's because all the interesting life evolution is after the Precambrian. So very few people that use the geologic time scale are particularly interested in the earlier part. But to scale, it's by far the biggest part of it. It's like 87% of it. The other thing,
a whole bunch of really boring shit happened at the very beginning of the
well,
Earth.
it depends on what you study.
Well,
If
yeah.
you study geochronology, which is basically the use of radiometric decay to age minerals, then that's really fascinating time. If you study evidence of very old plate tectonics, it's very fascinating. If you're studying life evolution, you don't really find much in the Precambrian that has hard parts to preserve as fossils. And even that, when you do find it, it's like the sliver right before the Cambrian. The other thing that astronomy and geology tend to have in common is, if you want to know how sugar dissolves in coffee, you take sugar, you put it in the coffee, you stir, you heat it, you do the experiment yourself, and you keep repeating it until you get it right. If you want to know how the Earth formed, you look at all the evidence you find in the rocks, and you propose a theory. And then you refine the theory over a long time, but it's not like you go back and reform the Earth to replicate your experiment. Astronomy is even, I don't say worse, but like the logistical challenges are even worse because the shit you're studying is really far away. So in addition to the fact that you can't go back and replicate what you're doing, you're looking at its, to steal a line from Watchmen, you're looking at its old photographs and judging everything you're doing based on millions of year old light or thousands or whatever it is, however far away it is. And you're having to do the best you can to explain the nature of the universe based on that, because what else are you supposed to do? But it's not like you can recreate the Big Bang in your lab.
Yeah.
You can take the chemistry aspect of it. You can burn certain elements and see what wavelengths of light pass through it, or what it, or pass light through a cloud of stuff and see what it'll stop. That kind of stuff you can recreate in a lab. You can take a rock and put it under intense pressure in a lab and see how much pressure it takes before it breaks or turns into something else. Those are the kind of things that you can do in a lab, but when they start talking about like this is the composition of the outer core, like they went and checked.
Yeah, that brings me around to science denialism as a whole, because I had a
I gather that's something of the impetus for the whole channel in the first place.
Yeah, I had a 5-hour conversation with Mr. Anthony Riley, and one of the things that he kept continually brought up was the fact that I and astronomers are not scientists, because we cannot physically manipulate the thing that we're experimenting on or dealing with. That absolute empiricism seems to be one of the hallmarks of at least flat earthers and science and space deniers. But more generally, do you feel that because I'm wondering whether or not I'm having a selection effect. What I'm looking at is because I'm surrounded on YouTube or what have you with a whole bunch of people who deny science. I'm wondering whether or not it's actually true that science denialism seems to be on the rise in this country. And that goes to, vaccines, COVID, all that kind of stuff.
I don't know the true answer to that question. I could see that it could be true. I certainly could see that it also could appear true because of the nature of things like YouTube, making loud voices seem louder and more representative than they are.
Yeah.
The example sort of being like the school board meetings where angry anti-vax conservatives show up. And then if you look into it, you find out that in a lot of cases, it's the same people traveling from school board to school board. If you just look at the way it's presented on your local news channel, if you're 80 years old and watch the local news, you would get the impression that like this is this grassroots movement that's everywhere, that people are rising up in greater and greater numbers. And perhaps it is certainly more on people's minds broadly than it used to be, but it certainly isn't what is presented in those images as being just people everywhere rising up and showing up to these meetings because it's astroturfed. So I don't. Is it science nihilism on the rise? I don't know. Yes and no. Like, public opinion about anthropogenic climate change is more in favor of the truth, to my understanding, than it's ever been. The trouble is the people making the decisions are not listening to those people. They're listening to the either to the particular segment of people that elected them, who may not be among those, or to the people that are donating to them, who may be the polluters, but who they didn't pollute just for the sake of mustache twiddling pollution. They did it for money bags pollution.
Yeah.
And one of the things I can tell you from the time that I was an environmental consultant is that, we didn't work with like Exxon, or what, just to use Exxon as an example. We didn't work with big international oil conglomerates. What we worked for is like local distributors. So the way that works in most cases, if you drive by a Shell station or a BP or whatever, like, most of those stations are not owned by the company. They're local franchises that sell that brand of gasoline. There are some that are owned by the company, but anyway, there usually might be, said company might own one, they might own 100.
Mm-hmm.
And the margin on selling gasoline is pretty small at that level. So in order to turn a profit, they keep it, they as close to the vest as they can. And when it came time to clean it up, like, they want to know exactly what the legal limit is, and they want you to clean it to that, because it'll cost them more if they don't.
Yeah.
Once you reach that, there is no one coming after you saying, well, I know the law says to clean it to 10 parts per billion, but let's see if we can get it to 0. Like, nobody says that. Anyway, I teach intro classes. In my intro classes, I teach climate change, I teach natural and human-induced climate change. And in the course of the class, we talk about the evidence for both. I get very little concerted pushback on that.
Okay.
I occasionally have a student say to me something like, I don't know, that sounds weird. Like, sure, some of this stuff does sound weird, especially when you're learning it very quickly and you have to move to the next topic. I teach biological evolution through natural selection because I teach historical geology. Historical geology is essentially, spend 6 weeks talking about the tools of how you interpret the environment and how you trying to piece together the history of the earth based on reading some sedimentary rock layers and the fossils in them. And then after that, we talk about the history of the earth and the changes in arrangement and size and so forth of the continents and ocean basins and the evolution of life. And I don't get a lot of pushback from students about that. I don't really get any pushback at all. Once you make it clear, I'll say to them, like, I'm not saying that people are evolved from monkeys, because they're not. People and monkeys evolved from a common ancestor that no longer exists.
Yeah.
What the closest thing I got to pushback at all this semester was one student who just thought it happened too fast. The actual human branching.
Yeah.
And that was, an indication that he had internalized a lot of the deep time thinking, that it seemed too quick.
Yeah.
Well, sometimes evolution does move quickly if there's changes in the environment. It's the ones who could survive survived and the other ones died. Like, that's that. So I what I don't know is I don't have a channel where I interact with, I guess you could say, science deniers. I'll put it a different way. You remember the person who performed my wedding, our good friend up in New York. Said person is a lawyer. His spouse is a lawyer. And she works for just special ed law, and discovered this kind of niche where if you're really rich and you have a kid who has special ed issues, well, you're really rich, so you can hire the best lawyers in the land to sue the school system to get you what you need. If you're broke, there are all kinds of legal supports in place, not as good as for the rich people, but there are all kinds of legal supports in place to provide assistance for you. But if you're in the middle, where you're not broke enough to qualify for that assistance and not rich enough to, just shell out for tons of top level lawyers, there's a need there. So she set herself up in that little niche. The trouble was, she spent all her days talking to people who have kids with developmental disabilities and things like that, to where when she was ready to have kids, she had it in her mind essentially that like every other kid in America has some kind of a serious physical or neurodevelopmental disability, and to the extent that, like severe.
Yeah.
And we had to talk to her about it. Like, no, I think this is sort of a bias that you've accidentally gotten just by what you're surrounding yourself by. Mm-hmm. I might be a little bit guilty of a bias here in that I don't seek out arguments with strangers. They drive me up the wall. I applaud you for what you do, but I would get angry and shout at them. So you get to deal with the comments.
That's a common response, to be honest with you.
No, I know it is. And I know many people who feel it is very important to engage in these conversations. I don't have a problem engaging in conversations. I don't have an interest in engaging in the conversation with randos per se, like just complete random strangers on the internet. Because, one of the people that I got to know through the internet, I met very briefly in person, is now I think the science director for the Nature Conservancy, Dr. Catherine Hayhoe. She's a really interesting human being. She's a climate science professor. She used to be at Texas Tech before she moved to that position. And her husband is some kind of evangelical pastor. And on top of all that, she's Canadian. So like just like a mishmash of all these. No.
Okay,
anyway, she's a big proponent of like, yes, things are terrible and things are getting worse, but there is nothing to be served by running around like your hair's on fire, if you happen to have hair. Just with this language like we're totally screwed and nothing can be done, because that helps no one.
Yeah.
Change is always possible. And one of the most important ways that there is change is we talk to each other, and we talk to each other about this problem. But you have to, almost nobody gets their mind changed by just presenting them with a list of facts, no matter how well derived those facts are, because people derive a lot of their identity in many cases from attaching to certain things, whether that thing is a political identity or a group identity. If a person is completely convinced that the earth is flat, for example, to accept something that is cognitively dissonant from that, some set of facts that clearly shows that the earth is fucking round, it pulls at a thread that is part of the tapestry of who they've made themselves to be, of who they really are. And rather than accept that, they're just gonna push that away. But it doesn't mean that person necessarily cannot be reached. You have to establish a certain common ground with people. And what she was talking about is, as someone who's involved in the faith-based community, and I'm not, but she is, that where she talks to people is, attached to her church community. And she would talk about the things they had in common, they go to this church together, and they're parents, and their kids go to the same school and they play at the same soccer fields. They like to breathe clean air. They like to drink clean water. And as you slowly build up that these things are true, and they start to slowly believe that you're a decent person who's telling truthful things, that's where you start establishing the things you can establish.
Yeah.
That we want to protect the things we have, and that there are reasonable ways to do that don't necessarily have to change who you are. Now, with regards to things like flat Earth, that's not something I've personally thought much about, because what I don't know is the degree to which that hurts other people. As somebody that doesn't believe in the efficacy of vaccines, there's a reason that many, many emergency rooms and hospitals are completely clogged. And it's because we as Americans, speaking broadly, I mean, I know you and I are vaccinated, but broadly speaking as a whole, the hospitals are just clogged with people that are largely unvaccinated. And I know one of our good friends who we game with currently has an elderly parent who's sick and is having trouble getting them the care they need, because the hospital is not only overloaded, but it is categorically unsafe for that person because of all the people there with COVID. My wife's grandmother passed away a few weeks ago, and they rushed her out of the hospital the first time because there were so many unvaccinated people with COVID. And that's an issue where a science denialism that in many cases is really attached to a political reality, or identity, I guess I should say, is hurting people. When it becomes to climate change, that's one where people's denial of it, people going out and buying the biggest diesel truck they can and then equipping it to go coal rolling just to own the lib over there who's driving a Prius. It melts my face.
What I found is, and I use flat Earth is, so what my, I guess, hypothesis is. I don't have strong evidence for it, but in my interactions, I found that if you believe one, it's like Lay's potato chips. You can't just have one conspiracy theory. If you believe in one, you will be susceptible to believing in others. Yeah,
I could buy that. That there's a susceptibility to this. I mean, I've certainly seen among people that are into QAnon and think that the election was stolen from Trump, also think that the COVID was invented and intentionally released from a Chinese lab, and that Bill Gates is putting microchips in the vaccine, and that, there's Occam's razor over here, and there's all these other things over there bundled up together for this. And I don't know if it's a situation where, I've read a lot of stuff about this, and I don't know exactly what, this is a little out of my lane.
Yeah.
But what strikes me about this is that in the same way that you and I at various points in our lives have been religious people of different religious persuasions, and religion can vary between, and I'm respectful of people's religious choices and traditions, but religion can certainly vary between very fundamentalist and much more cerebral, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of this stuff strikes me as a more fundamentalist point of view.
Yes.
Where the world, they want to understand things. And the simpler they can make it, even if that simple explanation almost oxymoronically is really,
complicated to make
complicated. Well, it's like Aristotelian, cosmology,
mm-hmm.
where in order for the Earth, the simple thing, the Earth is just the center of everything. Well, in order for that to be true, to track the path of the planets in the sun, and they've got to have these weird circles where this goes around that and this goes around that. The actual simplest explanation from what you observe is that the sun is the center of the combined center of mass of everything in the solar system, which is inside the sun, is the center of the solar system, that everything proceeds in elliptical orbits around that, but that the root hypothesis that we're not the center of everything jarred with.
Yeah, it goes to what you were talking about with it. It goes against their identity. I've spoken with flat earthers or creationists or whatever, and they have this. They seem to have this a part of their identity is its significance. They need the world to have some kind of purpose. And if the world is not the center of things and the world is not flat, for some reason, that equates to the world is meaningless. And so therefore their lives are meaningless, and they can't identify that with that. So I do fully agree with the idea that this is identity based.
Well, and it's one of the things where you have to be careful. Like, you don't want to get in a conversation with somebody and essentially be telling them something that tells them, yes, you and everything you hold of value are stupid and worthless. Yeah. Because nobody wants to hear that. Even if they're making choices or believing things that from our own perspective are pretty out there. So that's what I would.
Or even dangerous.
In some cases, yes. Like, I don't know the degree to which, we've used flat Earth as an example, and I know you've interacted with some people in flat Earth. I don't know the degree to which people who are, shall we say, disbelievers in a roundish Earth, an oblate spheroid Earth, to be particularly dangerous to most people if that's all they're into. I spend more worry about climate change, about vaccine hesitancy, because these are things that have a more immediate chance of impacting our lives, our planet, and so forth. But I think you may be onto something, that people who come to a conclusion that the scientists are all on the take, which is pretty hilarious, by the way. When I actually had a job where I was cleaning up environmental waste for a living, or telling people where it was, I made significantly more money on that with the bachelor's degree than I make now as a professor. Two-year college professors are not exactly raking. This is not a complaint. Like, I knew what I was getting into, and I like what I do. I like my job, but I didn't get into this because I'm making lots of money.
That's actually one of the problems that we have with so-called brain drain, at least in astronomy and physics, is, you go through all this bullshit, and you go through, and then the jobs are, shall we say, few and far between, and the pay is not great. You just go to industry. You go work for the man, and you get paid a hell of a lot more.
So my TA job, when I was a graduate student, I took over for a guy who was, you talk about that thing about being the smartest guy in the room. This guy was the smartest guy in the room.
Yeah.
This guy was one of those disturbing smart people, but a really, really nice guy. Like, I don't know if he ever felt imposter syndrome, but he wasn't a jackass about it. He's a very odd guy, like, didn't have a lot of personal skills, but not a very nice guy. Anyway, he was very interesting in that he did all of his education at USF, was the only child of very elderly immigrant parents, and never really wanted to be away from them for a variety of reasons, and went from bachelor's through PhD straight through with almost perfect grades. Did his work on using a whole lot of Python code and a bunch of GPS tags to map the movement of the Greenland ice sheet.
Nice.
It was so far above my Chrome Dome that I could barely follow his like plain English speech about the whole thing. And afterwards he got a postdoc up in New York, and he didn't even last a year before he moved back because he hated it so much. He hated being away from home. He hated where he was living in New York. He hated, just decided he hated academia. And then he got a job basically doing data science. The man was essentially a computer programming. His code, from what I understand, I'm a terrible coder or programmer, but he was that person that would write where other people would write 4 lines of code. He would write one elegant line that would do the whole thing. And everybody would look at him and just go, "You son of a," like, but I mean, like, he wasn't even like he'd sit there and write the codes and then think, well, maybe if I write this command. No, he would just write that code and that was it.
Yeah.
And everybody would go like
Just
most people that code, it's nothing like what you would see in old 80s movies where you're like, okay, and the password is, oh, and I'm in the Pentagon mainframe, and we'll launch the missiles. It's like, oh, this is cool. Oh, this is cool. Shit, now what? Shit. And then for like a week, it's just you swearing, and then finally you Google it. And that's, or, GitHub or whatever, like some equivalent thing, and figure out that somebody else smarter than you already did this. He's the person smarter than you that already did this, but that's where he ended up relatively happy and making like 5 times what I make doing data science for stuff that he could care less about, but he's where he wants to be.
Yeah. And he's making bank when it comes to.
But I can tell you right now, I was 3 times the TA he was because he didn't know how to talk to people. He didn't talk to the other humans. This is where it helped to be a little stupider.
Yeah.
Because I could look at another human being and understand a little bit better.
You can relate to them a little better.
Yeah, a little bit.
Right.
Like it also comes down with education. For anybody out there who's, ever contemplated becoming some sort of a teacher, a huge part of becoming a successful teacher is finding your level. I started as a high school teacher because that's where it seemed like the easiest level for a job. And I felt like I know what a high school kid wants, at least what I wanted. They're horny and they want to smoke in the bathroom or whatever. Like, well, they don't want to do that anymore. Now they want to vape in the bathroom. But that I kind of get what they're about. And I think I understand kind of what elementary school kids are about, but that's herding cats. And I don't. I've seen what they do. I have 2 small, now 10 and 11-year-old kids. Like, I've had small kids, and bless you, I don't envy you at all. But if that's, I know somebody who was a geologist who taught high school for a couple of years and hated it, and eventually ended up getting a job teaching 4th or 5th grade and loves it. Like the 9, 10-year-old kids are exactly their level. For me, I taught, basically juniors and seniors, and I was like, this is okay, but I need just a little bit higher. As an adjunct, I did have some interaction with upper class people, and so, college, junior, senior level, and that was okay. But I don't have that many classes I'd be expert at teaching at that level. And I really do feel like that intro level, 2-year college really is my area. So that's something where I think is important. But anyway, I think I've diverged from our debunking conversation in that what I teach, it really does. There are several, science denial subjects that just sort of naturally come in.
Yeah.
When you're teaching geology, you're going to teach evolution because first there was nothing, then you're going to find evidence of these microscopic forms of life. Then you're going to have trilobites and brachiopods, and then you're going to have,
Santa.
Then you're going to, saber-toothed cats, and then you're going to have us idiots. And if you look at the rock record, you can watch things kind of slowly and sometimes abruptly change from one to the other.
Big meteor hits and fucks everything.
Well, but then you find powdered meteor,
Yeah.
all over the earth, and there's historical geology. Some of the most fun stuff about it is, in a sense, it's kind of like doing a puzzle, because you don't look at what it was, you look at the remnants and garbage of it now. So you're looking at sedimentary rocks, which are pieces of other rocks, and inside those pieces of other rocks are pieces of dead life or footprints or stuff like that, dinosaur turds and things like that, and you're moving, and the stuff's used to be flat and now it's tilted and slid and broken and faulted, and you're going one step at a time, going, okay, well, first this happened, then this happened, then this happened, and then you reconstruct. But these are, it's got a coral reef in it, but it's in Alaska now, so it must have at the time, either it was at more tropical latitude or the overall global climate was different. So, there's a lot of
factors.
Almost like CSI kind of shit going on there. And in some cases, it does get very like detailed lab stuff. But in our class, we're just talking about it in an almost more qualitative way about that. And, we talk about the change, deep time and evolution. So any of the creationism, especially young Earth creationism, just goes right out the window with that class. And to be fair, nobody has to take this class. Like, somebody that's really into young Earth creationism can take chemistry, where they don't have to talk about the origin of the planet or anything like that. They can just say, sugar dissolves in water, and if you warm it up, it dissolves, and stir it, it goes faster. That we talk about all the ways that the climate changes, because there's sequences of rocks as you go offshore that it goes from coarse to fine. And then if you look at the rocks, you'll be like, well, then all of a sudden there's fine on top of coarse that indicates that the sea level rose. And then it'll do the opposite, and then it'll go back and forth and back and forth. That'll show you that, for example, during the Cretaceous, that sea level was way, like, there was no ice on Earth. It was just way higher than it is now, versus, when you had mastodons running around, that it was 100 meters lower than it is right now because of, 5,000 feet of ice. That you get to talk about these things in a natural way, and then you get to use that as a comparison for human-induced climate change. So it's a little easier for me to talk about those things because I don't have I've had setup for it, and by the time we're getting into these, I've had an opportunity to establish common ground and rapport with the students. It comes back to that thing about common ground, and they're not strangers to me at that point.
Actually,
when I was an adjunct, there was this kid that sat in the front row of a 150 seat auditorium, and this is an environmental science class. And this kid on his laptop, he's got Turning Point USA on there, So I'm just sitting there thinking, like, is this one of those kids that's like reporting your liberal professor to, like, they seem like a nice enough kind of kid, but in this, like, definitely 18-year-old straight white kid who, like,
knows everything,
still lives with his parents and absolutely thought he knew everything.
Yeah.
But I wasn't, it helped the way I did the class that it was a lot of, like, they were doing modeling where they got data and they did the modeling. I wasn't just coming up there saying, so the climate has changed and it's people's fault. Like, I let them do the modeling where and now add the greenhouse gases. And they watched it go up and they told me what happened. So I didn't have to tell them shit. Where we, then with environmental science, sometimes it's about policy as well. So, where he got a little latitude as they got to tell us, like, so what are you going to do about it? And within a little bit of reason, like, I have a lot more patience with people who accept that the problem exists and something should happen with it, but just have a slightly different take on,
how
I
to
don't want
actually
to. I
solve
don't
it.
want to have a carbon tax. I want to do this incentives over here instead. All right, fine.
I want to
Like,
eat hamburgers.
sure. Like I don't want to have forced vegetarianism because of the trophic levels and the methane or whatever. Like, okay, fine. So what do you want to do? Like, and that's, um, there were things we got to talk about in that class and I tried to be even-handed in the class as well. So like one of the things I would talk about in that class and that I use a lot. I don't know if you're familiar with Box's law. George Box was an English statistician, and I don't know. This could be one of those things where he never said this in as many words, but he said many things that essentially said this, where he basically said all models are wrong, some models are useful.
Yeah.
Which, if you extrapolate it a ways, step back at arm's length, and think about what a model is. And I'm not necessarily talking about like a complex computer model for climate change. I'm talking about any model, a model airplane, a globe, whatever. They're all wrong. Like if you have a globe in your desk, you fly over the border to Canada, there's no big black line in the ground with, US, Canada, Minnesota. Like that doesn't exist. That's wrong. That's a change they put in there so that they could impart information about the model. The model they made you is pretty close to perfectly spherical. The Earth is actually a little bit flat from top to bottom and a little bit bulged in the middle. I don't think you'd notice it with your naked eye.
No.
You know this, that Newton figured that one out. He's like, well, it's basically a centrifuge. It's spinning. It's going to get a little bit thicker in the middle. That model's not going to show that. It's made of cardboard. But the whole point of a model is to take something huge or complex or whatever and make it simpler and easier to see and understand.
Yeah.
That's why you have it. That's why you make maps. That's why you make computer simulations, because it's easier to work with a computer model than to actually take all the data for the whole world. That's not practical. But of course it's wrong. They're all wrong. That doesn't necessarily mean you should take all of the data from it or goes into it and all the results that come out and throw it out because it's wrong. Some of it's very, very useful. Some of it's complete garbage.
Mm-hmm.
But, the other one is from somebody you would definitely not have heard of, was a hydrogeology professor who's now retired from the University of South Florida, named Mark Stewart. And his answer was, models aren't data.
Yeah. I've heard that before. Yeah.
Yeah. Which is just, for those listening, again, just basically to say, models can give you some very important and useful information, but do not fool yourself into thinking that just because it says 50 years from now, the climate will be 8 degrees, whatever, 2 degrees, X degrees warmer, that is fact. That is data. No, that is what the model predicts. And what you put in the model is data. What you get out is modeled prediction.
Yeah.
And you have to take each for what they are. But if you take the same model and you use all of the available information from back as long as we've been studying things, and it says that it based on astronomical and geological factors alone, the climate actually should be going slightly cooler. And then you add in the human factors that are measured and it matches almost perfectly to where we're going. That helps you calibrate that model pretty well. And that same one says, oh, and by the way, if factors continue on the trajectory you're on, here's roughly where you're going. Again, it's not that extrapolation is not data, but it still should be cause for like, maybe don't go buy the big SUV. Like maybe we should consider regulating more of these industries. Maybe we should consider how we treat these things as a world, as a society, as individuals, and how corporations are dealt with. Because if you wait until that is actual data, that may very well be too late.
Yeah.
And I think in a lot of the cases, the worst thing you get out of it is a cleaner planet. Oh no, how horrible for us.
Well, I want to touch on, kind of go back for a second. You're talking about relatability, particularly with your students, and being able to connect with them in some ways has been beneficial for conveying information.
It helps if you have 12 students in the room. I think in
Yeah,
your case, in many cases, you've got
hundreds.
yeah, right. Well, that's the talking points one. I remember that kid because he literally was sitting like from here to my lamp in front of me in this lecture hall.
Hmm.
There was 150 students, and he was always the one right in front of me, probably so he could see up my liberal nose. Um, but I got emails later like, "Hey, I was in your environmental class. You want to write me a letter of recommendation?" And I'd have to look them up, like to see if they were making it. Who are you? Like,
Yeah.
nothing
When I have to
personal, but
ask
like,
who are you, the answer is no.
well, no, it's not even that. It's just a lot of the grading was done by TA.
Mhm.
Oh, I miss TAs. But that I just don't remember a lot of these people. So um, it, it, um, it leaving an impression
Harder.
is not always a bad thing.
Mm.
The said kid in question, I did a lot of group work in that class, and he drove his group mates crazy because he'd tell them he was too sick to do anything, but they did all of their conversations via Discord, and they could see that he was playing video games on Discord.
He's not too sick to play video games. He's just too sick
To read that one paper and make 2 comments.
Yeah.
Like, and it was just like, you're dealing with somebody that's also kind of figuring out how to adult.
Yeah.
And that was kind of a mess for me because, as we've discussed earlier, I was still very much figuring that one out for myself. And I always had kind of weird mixed feelings about the students that I identified there was a little bit of me going on there.
I know where you're going.
Well, when I interviewed with the guy that ended up being my graduate advisor, one of the things that he said worked out in my favor later was that I brought up what a crappy student I had been and why and what that meant and what it was going to do going forward. And basically that I had diffused the topic by putting it all on the table. So there were no secrets.
Mm.
But one of the things I said to him was, I kind of wish I could go back in time, find 20-year-old me, take a running start and kick him square in the ass, grab him by the shoulders and say, and this is more than I said to him, being an asshole edgelord is not a personality. Going to class is not a sign of weakness. Being inebriated all the time is not a personality either.
Mm.
It can be fun, but there's a time and a place, and you're here for a reason, and you better damn well figure out what it is. In reality, I have an ambivalence about that because I like who I am now, and I like the family I have now, and the path I chose, for good or ill, led me here. So it's not like I can go back in time and change that, but would I? Right. But there's plenty of things I probably should have invested, saved that baseball card kind of thing. But like,
well, one of the things I wanted to ask was,
but I'm sorry, but just to explain to him that, but because I can't do that this time, by God, I'm going to do it right. And for the record, I had a 3.94 in grad school, which is especially funny because nobody gives a shit. and you can speak to this. Like, people care what you published.
Yep.
They care a little bit maybe about where you went to school and who you studied under, what your dissertation topic was, what your field of study was. No one gives a damn about what your grades were.
Yeah.
And matter of fact, I had the highest grade in geochemistry, and the professor who was on my committee flat out told me, "Oh, if you're getting an A, you're spending too much time on your classes. You need to do research more." Like, okay, dude, whatever you say.
Yeah, I got that. So going kind of along the same lines of sort of connectability or relatability. One of the pieces of feedback or pushback that I'm getting from certain flat earthers that I've met or talked to is this perception that science communicators are arrogant, that people
Some of them are.
Okay. And yes, I would certainly agree with that. And also, what I found in academia, there are folks who actually truly believe that having a higher education makes them a better person. And I was wondering if you could speak to that. If
Oh, I've been guilty of that without meaning to. I was having a conversation with a student. We were out as in my environmental science lab this semester. We're out collecting creek samples, so we had to walk 10 minutes down to the crappy little creek next to our campus. And this student, who is a very good student, one of the things we do is, for example, we do a student of the semester for each section, and the student was my student of the semester. And she and I got in a conversation, and I casually said something about how someone didn't deserve to be treated that way, and it had to do essentially with their education level. And this person is a 2-year college student who works as a server, in a restaurant.
Mm-hmm.
And her response, she wasn't offended, but her response was, well, I don't think anybody, regardless of education level, deserves to be treated that way. And I stopped for a second because I'm like, oh, it's just totally right. Like, that was obnoxious of me. Like, I'm sorry. And I've worked those jobs. I've been a server. It's just been a few years, and I really got to watch myself. Like, there are things where or you or whoever, as someone with a graduate of the 21st grade, might be better suited to certain things. We might be more, I don't know, I guess, more knowledgeable maybe about some things. There are other things where it doesn't really make us any smarter than anyone else at all. What I think that a PhD gave me was an appreciation for how stupid I am. And I do mean to be a little humorous about it, but I also mean in the sense that the longer you're in a PhD program, the more you become aware of just a sliver of how much there is to know about how many subjects. And like, you don't even graze all the subjects, but just how much there is to know about your subject. And then you look at how many subjects there are, and it's not like yours is the only one that's complex and has stuff to learn.
Yeah.
And then you learn some overlap techniques from other subjects, and you're like, wow, those people are good. Like, so even the things that you as an arrogant undergrad had thought, well, that marriage and family, men suck, what a bullshit sociology class. Like, then you learn how to do research using social science methods, and you think the issue in that class might have been that professor, or it might have been the way that book was written, or it might have been me, or some combination of the above, or it might have been trying to take those results and package them in an intro class. But the issue was not the social science methods. That should be studied, and it's really hard to study. And I applaud the people doing it. So it's what I came to recognize over the years is just how stupid I am and how little I know. And one of the things you really learn in a PhD program is not all of the facts, but how to find new facts. One of the things that we laugh about a lot, I think, with science denialists, or especially like anti-vaxxers, is like, well, I did my research. And the derisive, snotty version we have is somebody sitting on a toilet looking up, green med info on their phone while they take a crap. And I'm sure those people are out there, but at the end of the day, most of the stuff I would look up on vaccines or whatever, I'm not a virologist or an epidemiologist. Most of what I would look up, I am also looking up through a computer or a phone. The difference, I think, is that many of those people, whether they realize it or not, are entering into it with a lot of bias. And maybe I am too, but they're entering it with the bias that those scientists are all pockets full of big pharma money.
Yeah.
So they immediately discount all of those peer-reviewed articles. And they focus on what one site that has some nurse who says they saw somebody that, Nicki Minaj's cousin's friend's balls swelled up. And when the Occam's razor answer is, dude cheated on his girlfriend and got syphilis, like, for me, when I get, you read some article, I mean, like a news journalistic style article.
Mm-hmm.
There was one yesterday that I saw that was like, that essentially masks work better than social distancing.
Okay.
By far. No matter how that a really well sealed N95 style mask works best, but that even if it's a surgical style mask that barely fits, it's still better than social distancing on either party, especially both. But what I did is the thing that I think a lot of people with PhDs do, which is assume the science writer doesn't know what they're doing and click the link to the actual journal article.
Yeah.
And then you learn how to skim a journal article to read the limitations of the study, how many people they actually studied, which people they excluded, things like that. And I'm sure there are things that an actual expert in epidemiology or virology would catch about that paper that I wouldn't, you wouldn't, but that somebody stereotypically scanning vaccine info network on their toilet is never even going to come to that because they're cherry picking their data to support their idea that, somebody said that they got a rash after getting the MMR vaccine or something, and then that proves something, in ways that were never peer reviewed or really double blind studied.
Seems to me it goes to the one of the commonalities I found is the science denialism stops asking the question why. They're satisfied with, this is what this says. This
I'm on this. Okay, hang on a second there.
Sure.
I'm on a live stream, so you're on.
Hi,
camera.
Josie.
What who?
The internet.
Okay.
Did you need something?
Where's mommy?
Probably in bed.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm. She did not expect to be on camera with the entire internet. Hi, internet.
Hi, internet. And where was I going with that? They stop asking why, so they don't look any deeper. They're like, oh, okay, so this nurse told me this. That must be the end of the story.
If there is a problem, and this can be true for scientists as well. Look, we are people. We are not immune from this crap any more than anyone else. But when you start your research from the point of view that this is what's true, and I need evidence to back it up, then you're backwards. There's that when you're on a high school debate team, that's the way to go about it. Mm-hmm. You pick a position because, and I suppose in a high school debate, you might very well be asked to argue either position. So you go cherry picking for evidence. You go find the stuff that supports what you're already going to say.
Yeah.
Where there are certainly scientists out there who, for whatever reason, are wrapped up in having a certain answer. And it really needs to be said, like, we are not immune from this. One of my favorite scientists to follow. So where I'm active is Twitter. I am, you want to spam me on Twitter, I'm at Vic Ricchezza, Geo. But one of the people that I would mutually follow, but I've never met her because she's in Europe, but that I pay a lot of attention to is I think she's Belgian. Her name is Elizabeth Bick, Bik. And one of the things that she does is she looks at a whole bunch of these published journals that are like a lot of medical stuff, a lot of biology stuff, and finds these clear visual evidences of people fabricating figures. And there's some big French scientists that she's busted on this that have a whole just legions of fanboys that are like, accuse her of being like on the take, of being jealous of his success, of being a failed scientist because she doesn't do like primary research anymore, that this is what she does now. And it's all such a bunch of crap. Like, whereas what they should be doing is looking at what she's got to say. Like, wait, this dude fabricated his results. Like, that's fucked up. Like, this guy should not be employed. There was, I think, actually, one of the things that was like a preprint or something about the Alzheimer's treatment or vaccine or something involved some of that stuff, where there was some serious allegations. Well, I mean, they haven't started distributing anything yet. And I am, for the record, the child of an epidemiologist. I am absolutely pro-vaccine. I have had three shots of the COVID vaccine, and the third one I got at the same time as my flu shot. The kids are fully vaccinated. My wife is immunosuppressed and fully vaccinated. Get your vaccines, goddammit. But that doesn't mean that individual scientists and or companies, doesn't mean that Merck and Pfizer are not squeezing the profits in any way they can, that they're not withholding the patents from the global south, where to no fault of the people there, the variants are potentially propagating right now because they don't have enough of the vaccines that are being held onto by the companies for their own profit. There is a big pharma. It's not in the habit of giving money to everybody that says that vaccines work. Yeah. That's why they're big, because they keep their goddamn money.
I wish
people that work on NIH grants get money from the government, but they get the money from the government to spend on the study. They don't get to fucking keep it. And if they find out that you keep it, they throw you in jail. You can say on paper that you use a certain amount of it to pay part of your salary from the university or whatever, but it's not like it's millions of bucks on something. Like, no, you don't get to do that. It's
and there's the whole racket of the fact that the university usually takes half of whatever grant money you get. But we're getting
when you apply for a grant, they have what they call indirect costs. So the university marks it up to keep the lights on, and then whenever you want to spend the money, instead of just buying what you got money for, you have to beg the university in triplicate to buy the thing. And depending on your university, there's some level of onerous bullshit you have to go through to actually spend the money. And in many cases, the universities will make it so onerous to do anything, or make you, sometimes it's not grants, sometimes it's travel and whatever, that they perfectly well know what's happening, that they make it so that you end up paying for the stuff out of your pocket and make it so hard to get reimbursed that they end up keeping their money.
Yeah.
What a scam. Like, we're not making extra money on this crap. Are you kidding me?
No. Well, we are getting light on time, but I did want to circle back. Taddy, if he's still in the chat, he was saying if you got into geology for rock and roll, but I don't think so. But you do have a rock and roll background in a way.
So around the same time that I was discovering geology, I was hanging out with many of our mutual friends were fledgling guitar players and playing in shitty college rock bands. And I did learn how to play the guitar, and my reasoning was not, I am a rock fan, but my reasoning at the time was that all of our mutual friends were speaking nothing but guitar. and I had no idea what they were. They might as well have been speaking Mandarin Chinese. I had no idea what they were talking about. So I learned how to play the rudiments of guitar just so that I would be part of the conversation. And that is now pretty much like I have two hobbies now as a 45-year-old college professor with children. One is playing guitar in my basement, and the other is playing D&D with this guy. But yeah, there's there's some rock and roll going on there. Or my Black Sabbath fairy wearing boots here. I would take my guitar with me on one of the nice things about geology as a major is there's lots of field trips. I was laughing at Rob the other day because he had to cancel a geology or a D&D game because he had to go to work. The telescope needed minding or repair or something.
Yeah.
And I was laughing at him for being a fool for working in a science where you have to work at night because the stupid sun is up all day. Geology is much better than astronomy because we have to have sunlight to look at the rocks. And when the sun goes down, we just drink beer.
Oh, well, we also drink beer. We just do it in the morning.
Just reverse the hours. Right?
Yeah, exactly.
So that was part of my whole thing with discovering geology. And sometimes, as a side note, that can create culture problems for people that don't drink. But geology is kind of renowned as a booze-filled group. And if anything, it kind of helped me in the state I was in at the time to find somewhere where these people were kind of animals. But they were animals that went to class and got their work done. So I could sort of operate in their sphere and still sort of get things done.
Yeah.
A little. So yeah, that's, I used to play open mic night at the time, Vic at midnight on Wednesday night. And then after graduation played in a band, really crappy, very, very bad band for a couple of years that someone else, referred to as a rock and roll train wreck, where it's horrifying, but you cannot not look at it. And then that broke up.
Particularly given some of the get-ups you got up.
Oh, the things I would dress in, some of the things that I would drunkenly say that, like in retrospect, were really stupid or downright offensive. Like going back to the whole thing that like being an inebriated edgelord is not a personality. And at the time I really thought that made a band like, I don't know, like something unique or whatever. And maybe it would if you had like music, but, it didn't occur to me at the time that maybe learning the instrument just a bit better, practicing a little bit more might be more appropriate, but my attitude at the time, that would have been like going to class, that
wouldn't work.
That's perfectly good bong time right there. So yeah. What, any further questions, Your Honor?
No, I think I'm gonna. Well, actually, I'm going to end with because you said both. I'm just going to go with Kirk v. Picard.
When we met, when we were much younger, my answer would have been such a clear and unequivocal Kirk.
Yep.
And I probably still lean a little Kirk, but I've come to appreciate a bit of Picard as I've gotten older and bald. I've come to realize that it's a little less realistic to go through life getting grade 4 space herpes at every planet with every green skin android, that it's just that not every problem can be solved by shooting Klingons. Although I did like life better when Klingons were just clearly like mustache twirling villains. Something like by the time you got into the Next Generation, like now suddenly Klingons are people who just have a different culture that involves honor, even though the only one with any honor is Worf. Yeah, every other one is like a backstabbing murderer. And then, but so now we have to kind of understand and like them. But the Romulans, are still just,
Comics.
conniving, gutless commie cowards. So it's just like, I get it to a certain extent that you want to understand people and bring them in as people. And I also understand to a certain extent you brought one on as a member of the crew. So you certainly can't treat all Klingons as the enemy.
Evil, yeah.
But, maybe you might want to extend that to everybody. I could tell you that, circle back to your question, Star Wars or Star Trek, since the time we met, it was Star Wars was 3 movies
Mm-hmm.
and a long forgotten Christmas special. and
That's forgotten.
Hey, Life Day's coming up, man. And Star Trek was 2 series.
Yep.
One of which wasn't even concluded yet. So at the time, I might have even said Star Wars. Looking at it now, I will say Trek as the overall body of work.
Yeah.
Because Star Wars made these prequel movies that had some few things going for them, I guess, but overall, it's pretty crappy. And they had these sequel movies that, again, there were some things in there that were okay, but the number 7 was just a completely derivative remake with new characters, and number 9 is a steaming pile of poop with end credits. Like, it was one of the worst movies I have seen. I happen to like The Last Jedi, but it doesn't fit in very well with everything else. But they at least he was trying to do something at the very least, which I can say, unlike whatever Abrams was doing in 7 and 9.
Fan service.
Well, 9 especially was like, oh, well, I see that some of the Gamergate douchebags were really pissed off about episode 8 because a girl got lines. So let's make a checklist of all the things that we think all the fans would really like to see. Oh, let's have Wedge show up for 3 seconds. Okay, check. Let's have this. And like, there's 5 seconds of quality in that movie, which is Chewbacca crying because Leia died. Like, that's it. The rest of it is garbage, hot freaking garbage. Like, I've grew up on the series of movies, and that's the only one in that series that I did not go back and watch again in the theater, like the week it came out.
Yeah.
I walked out with my wife and said, wow, that sucked. And I will also like to publicly humiliate myself, okay, and say that at the time that episode 1, The Phantom Menace, came out, I and several other friends got like brain melting, drooling stoned, and went in and watched The Phantom Menace with your host, who was not so inebriated. And the rest of us all walked out and were like, oh, that was great, man. Because what happened was a combination of us being, so it would have been about 23 maybe or something like that when that came out. Like 99, right? It's a combination of us being, and then I can tell you, like, the nostalgia when the music hits and the screen crawl, Star Wars comes up. Like, it was like, yeah, it was like being 8 years old and I met the Return of the Jedi.
Yeah.
Like, yes. And like, and then there's lightsaber fighting and, cool stuff like, oh, look, Yoda. Like, and Rob walked out of that and said, I don't know what movie you 3 sat through, but the one I just watched sucked balls. It was terrible. And we all looked at him, and I will give this away here, that Rob will watch some of the crappiest TV shows I've ever seen and go, oh, yeah, that's fine. And I'm like, how can you even watch that? But Rob's idea on movies, he has very, very stringent standards for movies, and at least as far as what he likes. And we, in light of all that, we all looked at him and were like, Rob, you grumpy old curmudgeon, you just decided not to like anything. And then, years pass, and then the next one comes out. So we rewatched the first one. We're like, guess it wasn't as good as we thought, but it's all right. But this one has more Jedis. And then the third one comes out, and we're like, well, there's the bad guys win. Like, that's nice. Like, but that first one is really kind of. Now we fast forward to now, and it's like, wow, Rob was right. That movie sucks. Like, that movie really sucks. It's like, so Rob was right, and we were all wrong.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Please do not extrapolate these results to any other movie, series, or event. But in this particular instance, Rob figured that out right away. He stepped in it and smelled what he had stepped in, and the rest of it stepped in it and said, "Oh, it's." We had the cognitive dissonance of people that let's wrap it back around to science denialism. Like, our identity and being was in like Star Wars is fucking great. From the time that the first movie memory I have is my grandfather taking me to like re-releases of the original Star Wars. And like, I was like 2 or 3 years old, like little kid, because the movie came out when I was like 6 months old or something or whatever. Like, and literally I was so small that I would do this when Vader cuts down Obi-Wan. Like, my room, like most kids in the late 70s, was just full of fucking Star Wars toys. So like my whole youth identity was wrapped up in Star Wars being amazing. Rob was able to separate A from B. Like, yes, those were amazing. This sucks. This just doesn't fit with that.
Yeah.
And us in that moment, like Star Wars, da, 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 like, well, this is Star Wars. This is great. Rob is wrong. Like, because we couldn't separate what we had seen, and we were stoned, from what was going on the screen. And over time, we kind of came to it organically after they made more shitty movies. And then, humorously, you look at it now and people are like, well, Solo was really bad. I'm like, well, Solo was fine. Yeah. This is just a stupid adventure movie. Like, it didn't try to be anything it's not. It didn't have Jar Jar.
Yeah. Didn't have Anakin Skywalker in it. It was nice. Or Hans Christian Andersen or whatever his fucking name is.
Well, you know what? Like, the Phantom Menace, what's stupid about that movie is that, like, if they had made Jar Jar or something like him unintelligible to human speech. So he goes, quack, 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 quack. And Qui-Gon looks at him and goes, well, that's true. Because through the Force or whatever, he can understand him. The movie's totally different, especially since Jar Jar has more lines than anyone else in that movie. Additionally, if Anakin really is too old to begin the training, he's 20. He's like Luke was at the start of Episode 4. Then I think you have a whole different movie there, because you can also get a better actor.
Yes.
Although they didn't the next time around, but that's another story. He's better than Jake Lloyd.
True.
All right. Anyway, I think we have probably reached the limit of our allotted time, good sir.
Yes. Yes, we have. I just want to take a brief moment to thank everyone in the chat. Dora, Clive, Tusk, Dumjeza, Taddy.
In my long spirit of swear trek, where they're like, I read the comments. Like, I have not even looked at the comments, so I haven't seen a damn thing you said, except for one or two that Rob popped up on the screen. But I think everything you said was wonderful, and thank you for saying it.
Thank you. I wanted to just clarify a couple of different points. Dora, he does not have poltergeists. He has cats. Hence why the door was closed at the beginning of the interview and opened.
Oh, yeah, I think I had it slightly ajar, and the little white cat. Here, I see one. Hold on. We have Lucy here. Lucy is my grouch. She's really happy to be here. Put me down, asshole. But actually, it was the little white one that came in. I was actually going to try and pick her up, but she was like, yeah, you in what army?
Yeah, no, I'm not going to do that.
What was the other point of clarity?
Clive had said, which I'll circle back to Clive in a moment. Clive had said earlier on that in the UK, PhD is 100% research, and that is somewhat true in the United States. In the States, with my experience, Vic's was a little bit different, but my experience, if you're a PhD student, the master's degree is sort of it's kind of like the associates in bachelor's when you're getting a bachelor's degree. It's
Well, I can tell you, what it was is if you came in and went straight bachelor's to PhD, then you had to have 90 credit hours at a minimum, of which I want to say like something like 45 was structured, which means real classes. If you got a master's, then the master's had to be like 24 structured hours and then 6 hours of thesis research. And then starting from a master's, you have 60 credit hours you have to get. 15 of it is classes. So it's something like 5 classes. So it usually just ended up being like very specific targeted classes that helped with that, whatever kind of research you were doing. But it was usually taken care of very early. And the way I did mine, I actually think I only took maybe 1 or 2 classes after my master's. And it was all like social science methods classes kind of thing, like that I wouldn't have been able to do it without that.
Yeah. Yeah, for me, the first 2 years of grad school is basically taking classes, getting your master's degree, and then all of the rest of it is PhD. But speaking of Clive, Dr. Clive Wells will be my next guest next week, assuming he still wishes to join us. I very much look forward to it because I believe Clive is going to definitely be the smartest man in the room when I speak with him. So thank you all again for coming. And as Dora would like to thank you, Vic, because you are far more entertaining than I am, apparently, with talking about myself for 2 hours.
Well, if you really like listening to me, why don't you come down here and sign up for my class?
Yeah, enrollment issue. That's another 2-hour conversation.
Right.
All right.
As I here, I'll put it in. No, I won't. That's my wife's mouse. In the comments. How does one chat? Oh no, that's their chat. I don't get to comment, do I?
I don't know if you can.
Well, how about that?
There's private chat, but
all right. Well, fuck them. All right.
Yeah,
well,
if
it's
you
just
wanted to comment, you'd have to get onto the YouTubes.
Yeah, not going to happen. At Vic Ricchezza, RICCHEZZA, GEO is my Twitter handle. If anyone wishes to find, heckle, irritate, or speak to me, I am there. Obviously, no one is under any obligation to do so. And thank you all for putting up with me for 2 hours and 23 minutes.
It was excellent. All right, folks.
Wonderful. Thank
Bye-bye.
you. Goodbye.